Well, welcome to our closing session entitled A Fireside Chat, in which Dr. Preston Reynolds, a tenured professor at the University of Virginia and past president of the APHC, will be interviewing Dr. Richard and Dr. Sylvia Cruess, who are nestled away in Ontario. Did I get that right, Dick?
You got it right.
Okay. And I'll let Preston introduce our guests and sit back and enjoy.
So I'm going to start with Sylvia. She's a graduate of Vassar with a Bachelor of Arts and a medical degree from Columbia in 1955, where she met her husband, Dick. She professionally is trained as an endocrinologist, has served as professor of medicine, but also as director of the Metabolic Day Center, and as medical director of the Royal Victoria Hospital, which is a teaching hospital affiliated with McGill. And she served in that role from 1978 until 1995. Since 1995, since her retirement from that leadership role, she and her husband, Dick Cruess, have carried out research, teaching, as well as national and international presentations on the area of professionalism, and that will be the focus of our fireside chat. I'll come back to their joint awards. Dick graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts from Princeton in 1951 and from Columbia with Sylvia in 1955. He completed his residency in orthopedic surgery at the Victoria Hospital and Columbia University, and then joined the faculty at McGill. He has served as chair of orthopedics for 5 years, directing a basic science laboratory really as an orthopedic academic surgeon. He also served as dean of the medical school from 1981 to 1995. So when both of them retired from their leadership positions, they took a sabbatical. And it was during the sabbatical that they launched their collaborative teamwork in the area of professionalism. He served in numerous roles as president of organizations. He is a companion of the Order of Canada, and Sylvia is an officer of the Order of Canada. And together, they have been awarded the Ian Hart Award from the Canadian Association of Medical Education, the Gold Medal of the Association for the Study of Medical Education, and the Flexner Award from the Association of American Medical Colleges. Together, they had established in their honor the Richard and Sylvia Cruess Chair in Medical Education. And in 2018, the McGill University Health Center named its principal amphitheater in their honor, which is an amazing distinction. So with that background, I'd like to turn to Sylvia and Dick. And we had some preparation for this, and I was blessed to be guided by their curriculum vitae and a conversation. So Dick, you focused your career in academic medicine, later served as dean, and Sylvia on endocrinology, and then as medical director, and really worked in the field of medical administration. You also raised a family while serving in major leadership roles. I'd like to start off by asking you what pearls of wisdom would you share about balancing professional responsibilities with personal and family responsibilities?
Well, first, I think the family has to always be first. Fortunately, our family was very cooperative and we had time to do our professional careers.
You know, we met in medical school. We were engaged at the end of first year, married at the end of second year. And we, for all of our careers started with absolute equality. You know, we were equal medical students. So I think that allowed us to split up the tasks, to start splitting up the task even before we had children. And
both of us could do the other one's chores in homekeeping and cooking and so forth. Dick is quite talented.
But frankly, this was never a sort of a problem. It just sort of evolved as we went through medical school and then our training together. And we did have a little, the first person home had to cook. So there was
And clean up after the dog.
and clean up after the dog. So there was always an incentive to maybe work a little longer. But aside from that, it wasn't a big issue. We get asked that question fairly often. And we just sort of used some common sense and
Good.
everything worked out.
Good. And your children are successful, as your own careers have been successful.
Yeah, we have two sons who are both doing just fine, thanks.
Who's already retired.
One who's retired, that's right.
They retired maybe before you did, because you just retired in June.
You are correct. He retired before we did.
As you shared with me, I was fascinated with this. When you decided to step down from your leadership roles, which are very prominent, one is dean and one is vice president for the Royal Victoria Hospital, you decided to take a sabbatical together. And that's when you launched your work in professionalism. My question to you is, what did your leadership experiences expose you to that shaped the questions that you asked during sabbatical?
Well, let me start by saying that we had two separate projects when we were going to start. We live in a country with a National Health Service, which sort of encourages ministers of health to interfere with medical education, because we're, of course, the factory that produces the people that take care of their packet. So during my 14 years as dean, I had substantial intrusions into what I thought was my academic freedom. And I decided that I was going to study the place of academic freedom in medical education. I did a literature search and got about 100 or 1,000 articles on tenure in medical school, and not much else. Sylvia, on the other hand,
I literature search on professionalism because I had, as a medical director, seen some very good people do some things that I wondered whether they should have. How professional and what did professionalism really mean? And we got a huge stack of literature from mainly in the social sciences that had been looking at medicine for 100 years. So it was quite clear which one we were going to spend our time on.
Yeah.
So the good thing is that Sylvia's insight as vice president of the Royal Victoria Hospital actually opened the door for what you guys have spent the last 25 years in.
Yeah, and
that is correct.
And by the way, it's an absolutely classic example of the wonderful things that can happen from a sabbatic year.
Yep. Well,
the sabbatic year was absolutely transformational for us.
Wow. So you guys have published an enormous body of work in this area. And you've done it together. Every publication is really a joint publication. And you really are the classic example of the word team, which is together we accomplish more. Is there a secret to your productivity? Does one do the outline and the other one fill in the details, or do you hash it out together? What's the secret?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure it's a secret, and I'm not sure how applicable it is to people. I was trained as an academic. I spent a year in the Department of Biochemistry at Columbia, and before I left, my mentor had forced me to write a paper and to put in a grant application to the Medical Research Council of Canada. Sylvia never had that type of research training, but we would together, having read the literature, we'd come up with an outline of what we thought we should say. I would be the one who was essentially trained to do the writing, but we were heavily influenced by the social sciences, where 10,000 words is a nice place to start a paper. And so Sylvia's main job, once we figured out what we were going to say, was,
It's a cut and slack.
was to bring it down into something that would be acceptable to a medical education journal, where 5,000 words is much more than you can usually get away with. So we actually worked pretty well. The first year was kind of tough because we tried with both of us writing, and then she'd start to work and she'd take out the sentences that I thought were the best. And so I'd take out her good sentences. And I don't say we had friction, but we had interesting discussions. Like, God damn it, I leave that in.
So I suspect that your debate among each other and your dialogue and your teasing out the important points probably really strengthened your papers.
Oh, very much.
And that most often they probably didn't get rejected.
Oh, everybody gets rejected.
Yeah, we've had our rejections.
Talk to us about your paper in academic medicine in 1997 and how important that paper was. And in fact, how important the rejection was to where you ended up taking your careers.
Well, we first put in our first paper essentially brought the literature in the social sciences into medicine for the first time. They're quite literally, aside from a really good article by Fred Hafferty in Minnesota Medicine, there wasn't anything respectable that had been written. You know this, Preston, because you sampled that literature at the same time. And the medical profession was largely uninformed about the nature of professionalism and the place of the professions in society.
And didn't know what society was thinking about it. And
No one in society was talking about professionalism.
No, well, you know, the profession was being questioned at that time.
Yep, it was.
And actually, its professionalism was what was being questioned.
That's exactly correct.
So what we did was bring in the social sciences literature into medicine in a readable form. And that first article we actually sent to you said we don't get rejected. We tried the New England Journal, and they thought it was kind of preachy and didn't accept it. But we then sent it to, with some changes, but not many, to academic medicine. And it's frankly the only article in my whole life that was accepted with no changes at all.
Wow.
And it remains, it remains very heavily cited, and it also almost says everything that we've been saying ever since. We were pretty dead on at the beginning, but you must remember that those weren't our thoughts. Those were the distilled thoughts of Elliot Friedson and Fred Hafferty and Donald Light and a whole bunch of wonderful social scientists who had been studying medicine for forever, but none of them ever published in medical journals.
So you have a collection of colleagues at McGill that I'm sure you turn to in terms of teasing out these ideas, as well as you applied for a few small grants. It wasn't as though you were doing this body of work with this $1 million grant that you were tapping into. How did the culture of McGill and how did some of those small early grants help move you along?
Well, I guess in the first place, you must remember that, and we talked about it with you, that we had the absolute luxury of having a position, and I had a salary. Sylvia was retired from the hospital, so she didn't have a university salary, of absolutely nothing to do except study professionalism. That was our day job. And there is almost nobody in this world who has no administrative, no official teaching responsibilities. And so that gave us kind of the intellectual freedom to go where we wanted. But we were in what was then called the Center for Medical Education at McGill University. And it had a collection of individuals. Every single thing that we wrote had been bounced off of some skilled medical educators who were participants and in many instances co-authors.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that's true of most people's contributions these days. Nobody can do it all by themselves, and particularly, you know, an orthopedic surgeon and an endocrinologist who dove into the world of medical education with no preparation or training. We didn't know even the vocabulary.
Well, that speaks to the beauty of the culture of McGill as a very collective culture, and a culture that welcomes people and enters into dialogue of diversity.
Well, we are obviously hugely grateful to McGill. You know, they have
allowed us to continue working and doing what we enjoy.
And we got tremendous support too.
So you started off focusing on teaching professionalism, and then you modified the mini CEX for use in professionalism assessment. So I want you to share what you have distilled over time as kind of the core components of teaching, and what insights do you have to share about why assessment is so important in terms of the adoption of a professionalism curriculum or training program?
Well, I'll start by saying that assessment drives learning. And so we realized that and determined a way to assess professionalism and there is a core knowledge of professionalism that can be examined.
You know, you said that we started off by teaching, but that's not entirely true. We started off by stating that making the medical profession more professional, or returning it to its professional roots, depending on how you want to express it, was an educational issue.
Yep.
That it was, frankly, the rejection by the New England Journal helped us along in this, because we originally had thought that what we should be doing was writing for practicing physicians so that they'd understand this important thing. And we realized that at least the New England Journal didn't think that was a good idea. And then we kind of reoriented our thinking to thinking, look, if we're going to make people more professional, the easiest thing is to do it through the educational system at both the undergraduate and the postgraduate level. But the first step that we really had to do after we started teaching, actually, we used the Oxford English Dictionary definition of professionalism, which didn't work very well with students. So the first thing we had to do was write a definition, which we did and published. We then started teaching. But as Sylvia said, one of the principles of medical education is that if you're going to teach something and it's going to have any impact, you've got to be able to assess it. And as we all have learned the hard way, assessing professionalism isn't very easy, but it is doable. So once we established a curriculum that was evolving and getting better and more complex by the year, we realized we had to devise methods of assessing professionalism, because there were none out there that were valid and reliable. So we took the mini CEX and transformed it into the professionalism examination, the PMEX. And of course, you talked about assessing. The students, it was interesting, I saw that earlier on, somebody used the Brainerd student assessment of professionalism, of teaching professionalism. The students came to us and said to us, this is wonderful, we appreciate what you're doing, but we are on the wards and we see unprofessional conduct and you don't do anything about it. Yeah. So after we devised the PMEX, which was designed to allow attendings or teachers to assess the professionalism of students and residents, in response to a real demand from our own students, we then developed a form, which is also published and valid, for students to assess the professionalism of their teachers. It's called the PACT. And that was, for us, that was a really satisfying thing. It, by the way, hasn't sold very well. There aren't. I don't think very many people are using it. But the principle that that students have to assess how their teachers modeled the professional is really important.
We were able at McGill to get it installed so that the students evaluated the professionalism of both residents who teach them and their faculty on a regular basis. And this is given to the faculty member annually and a copy to their department chair, and departments handle it. Most of them sit in.
And we essentially had 100% compliance because our undergraduate dean put in a rule that students could get their marks electronically until they had filled out the forms on 2 attendees and 2 residents from each major rotation. And it's kind of cold in Montreal in the winter, and you have to walk to the dean's office.
And it's uphill.
And it's uphill. So virtually every student, we have just thousands of those. They're wonderful.
But it's interesting because, first of all, you got into workplace assessment a lot earlier than others without even knowing that that's where you were going. And you ended up doing something for the practicing physician, which is where you started, but then you got there through teaching students and assessing them, and then moved on to the faculty. So it's interesting how that really came full circle with the PMEX and then using it with the faculty.
That's correct. And the PMEX, by the way, there still aren't very many valid tools out there. We still get almost weekly requests for information about the PMEX.
So do you have insights about what content should be taught in the preclinical years, in the clinical years, in the residency years? Is there a longitudinal way we could think about sharing this body of information?
Absolutely. And by the way, it's not really very complicated. Well, as you implement it, it is, but the principles are straightforward. There is a cognitive base to professionalism. It includes a definition of what it is, why society allows us our privileged position. It includes the attributes of the professional that are historical and some parts of it are universal. And we tend to think that you need to outline how professionalism is linked to our relationship with society, which we have come to believe it represents. No, which the sociologists have stated that professionalism is the basis of our social contract with society. So we have always put a great emphasis on the nature of the social contract, how it's negotiated in our teaching. So that's the cognitive base, and we'll presumably at some point state that professional identity formation and socialization and communities of practice is now part of our community, of our cognitive base. But you then need to make sure that the values are internalized by students and residents, and that's the tough part. Anybody can, you can teach people how to treat a diabetic, you can teach people what professionalism is, but that doesn't necessarily make them professional. Robert Merton, great sociologist, has a quote that we've used over and over and over again because it's so good, that the purpose of medical education is to make people think, act, and feel like physicians. And that's what you need to do, and that's where we end up. One way where we ended up with identity formation. For a long time, we would give talks, and people would say, "Look, can you really teach professionalism?" And we would give an answer that wasn't very good because it's hard to answer. They would say, shouldn't they have learned it from their mothers? Or Ed Pellegrino Ed Pellegrino didn't like the word professionalism because he said all you need is the virtuous, I think he said virtuous man, but it would be virtuous person. So teaching professionalism was in many ways not terribly satisfactory. We, like everybody else, used small group and vignettes and peer pressure and discussing things in depth, and it worked, but it still left a little bit short. I'm sure you tried to do the same thing and have had the same responses.
Well, I think we've all learned effective strategies for doing this. And now through Zoom, we're also learning new effective strategies by using online modules with professional formation and other resources.
Yeah.
So I agree. We learn by making mistakes how to do it better.
And Zoom, by the way, it can be very effective in doing the cognitive base.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just did one with the residents, my professionalism 101, and it, you know, in some ways it worked better than doing it in person. So I am, you know, I'm not dispelling the value of Zoom yet.
No.
Are you guys still there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, great. So I want to come back to this concept of the social contract because I think it is such important work that you did and contributed to. You know, I see the social contract through the social justice model, but you brought the social contract into the professionalism space, anchoring it in the sociology literature. And you've traveled all over the world giving talks in Asia, Australia, New England, America. Do you think that there is one social contract for the medical professions that's common around the world?
Oh, no.
No, there are many different social contracts, but I think there is a core of what the profession is that is shared. And, you know, things such as confidentiality, such as integrity, such as competence. I think those are universal.
You know, we're in Canada. We look like you. We talk like you.
Oh, we wish we were with you.
Yeah, we have.
We sympathize with that. We're glad to be here.
But you know, we share huge numbers of values and stuff. But Canada and the United States are totally different. United States social contract stresses individual responsibility, whereas in Canada we take collective responsibility for a lot of actions, and there are historical reasons for it and a whole bunch of things. But there's a literature that talks about macro social contracts, micro social contracts. You know, the macro social contract actually sets the parameters of the micro social contract. Within that social contract in your country and our countries, that stressing individual accountability and responsibility has meant that you essentially have never had a true national health service. Whereas our emphasis on collective responsibility has meant that we had one fairly early in the evolution of social thought in the world. So the answer is that the social contract has to reflect the cultural values of the country in which it finds. And as Sylvia said, you know, the values of the healer, we tend to teach that a physician has two roles to play in this world. One is a healer and the other is a professional, and that they're linked but separate. The values of the healer go back before recorded history, you know, caring, compassion and stuff. You can't legislate caring and compassion and competence, but you can certainly legislate a whole whole other parts of the social contract in our two countries. And so, and if you look at the social contract, for example, in the Muslim world, or in parts of Europe, where we talk about patient decision-making and so forth, it's a family responsibility in many countries to decide whether a woman has a hysterectomy or not. It's an absolute anathema in North America and the UK. So there are really substantial differences in the social contract.
Yeah,
every country has a social contract, whether it's explicit or not.
Yeah, I've been involved in starting a social justice medical school in Nepal on the British 6-year MBBS model. But the mission of the school is to train students to be committed to caring for the vulnerable and underserved. And even within the medical school community in that country, there are different social contracts, even within that medical school system. So it's interesting. And those are primarily Muslim and Hindus. So they make decisions with families, and yet that role of the healer, the role of the expert, the role of dedicating your services to care for people, those are consistent. How it gets played out in a system with no health insurance and with different religions creates a different professional ethic, but with the goal of providing the best care to your patients.
Yes, and
How did you move into professional formation? Was it a natural progression from teaching to social contract to then saying, how do we internalize these values?
you mean identity formation?
Yeah, identity
Okay.
formation.
Well, part of it, Fred Hafferty, who most of you know, he certainly talked to the Academy, is a really close friend of ours, and he was very important to us because we were essentially playing around in the sociology playpen, and he
That's his.
yeah, we worried about whether we were okay or not, and Fred told us we were okay. But one time he asked us, "Do you care why people behave professionally? Is it just something they do because they're afraid of the consequences?" And the orthopedic surgeon in me, I actually said, "I couldn't care less, Fred, why they are. I just want them to be professional." And we were wrong.
Wow.
Professionalism isn't like some people talk about, is it a white coat where they let you take off when you're finished or not? But Fred said, are you a professional because of who you are? And so we were unhappy with the direction that we were taking, even when we had a very successful curriculum with assessment methods.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the literature on identity formation started to be transposed into medicine. Lynn Monroe was sort of the most wonderful of the people, but and we became aware of neither of us had ever studied much any developmental psychology, but Erickson and Piaget and so forth. And we suddenly realized something that we believe very passionately, that it has always been the intention of the medical education system, going back thousands of years, to turn out people who thought, act, and feel like a physician, who had a professional identity. And we got into that literature, and we also got into the literature on communities of practice. And Levin Wenger, very simple, straightforward thing that describes professional identity formation in medical terms so very well, that you start off as a peripheral member of the community of practice that you wish to join, and you gradually acquire the knowledge and skills and move to the center of the community. You're accepted as a member of the community, and in so doing, you acquire the identity of the community. And, that describes the medical education journey just so accurately.
So in some ways, like we think of Fred, who's on this call, as having enlightened us to the hidden curriculum. But actually, I think this identity formation is the hidden agenda of health professions education. And what you've done is you've made that hidden agenda very explicit, and that it's something that we need to attend to, and that we need to focus on and make visible and help nurture.
We couldn't agree more. I mean, we believe, well, I'm going to also interject a little something. We think that the field of medical education and research into medical education, since the medical education field developed about 25 or 30 years ago, has all been to try and make explicit what we have been doing for many years, and which was implicit. The whole professionalism movement. Sylvia and I graduated from medical school in 1955. You were a little later, but I'm sure that neither of us ever heard the word professionalism. We became professional it wasn't that they didn't teach it.
By osmosis.
Yeah, by osmosis from role models.
Exactly.
And that's still a very important way.
When you look at the literature on role modeling, it is attempting to make what has been going on for thousands of years absolutely explicit, so we do it better.
Right.
So I've forgotten the question to which I just gave an answer, but
well, you just responded to my comment and gave me another comment. So I love your book, Teaching Professionalism, which focuses on professional identity formation. And I have had the privilege of doing some interviews, podcasts with the authors of those chapters. And I have been moved by, like John Norsini, having been moved by you to think about assessment in a format, in a framework of identity formation. And I want you to think about your impact in helping scholars around you. Fred's helped you, Lynn's helped you, and how you have helped them broaden their framework of thinking about their own body of work. Like John in assessment, now thinking about assessment as a tool to really shape identity formation.
Well, I guess, the field of medical education is evolving so that it is now possible to do a PhD in medical education and spend all your time doing that. But that wasn't true a few years ago. Medical education was created by people who came in with knowledge and skills from multiple disciplines, including education, including sociology, and so forth and so on. So we've been in medical education for 25 years, and we brought to that field of medical education the experience that we had gained, I as an orthopedic surgeon and a dean, Sylvia as an endocrinologist and a medical administrator. So when you say how did we impact this, we about every 2 or 3 weeks, we have about a 2 or 3 hour telephone conversation with Fred, where we talk about the things that come out of our experience, and he bounces back as a sociologist, but he bounces sociology ideas at us, and we reinterpret them in light of I think probably now medical educators. I think that that we have now developed an identity as medical educators. I still think of myself as an orthopedic surgeon, but that's for selfish reasons, because I like the reputation of orthopedic surgeons.
Well, it sounds like Fred is part of your inner circle. So Fred, I know you're on this call, and we're all thanking you for being part of the Cruess's inner circle of chat comrades. So let me pivot a little bit. You're surrounded by French-speaking Canadians, English-speaking Canadians, and then McGill, which is home to training hundreds of residents from all around the world. And Montreal, as a city, is very multicultural, with a large Muslim community of people. And it's very LGBTQ friendly. So you are around a lot of cultural diversity. As you reflect on your work at McGill as Dean in medical education for the last 25 years. Are there real differences? The way residents from different countries, from different cultures come to McGill with their framing of professionalism expectations? And how does training at McGill shape them as they go back to their countries or as they continue there?
Yeah, that's a fascinating
Yeah,
question to which we're not going to have.
we don't really have an answer.
We don't have a data-based answer. We tried, actually. We run about we did until our government got in a fight with Saudi Arabia. We ran about 300 to 400 residents from the Middle East in our system at any given time. It started when I was dean. I signed the contract. And so we brought people from the Middle East into residency programs at McGill, and they had very different cultural backgrounds. And we now know it's in the literature, you know, the Muslim world's interpretation of professionalism is unique to the Muslim world. And it includes a heavy influence of the Muslim religion, whereas we are consciously secular. So I tried, and there are about 6,000 doctors in Saudi Arabia who have been trained at McGill. And I tried to get our undergraduate, our postgraduate dean to get some money and to look at the impact of our training on the Saudi resident. They're not just all Saudis. They're from the whole Middle East. But I also wanted to study the impact of those residents on our community. Yeah. Because, for example, a Saudi resident who's never been out of Saudi Arabia, their first rotation at McGill may be to the Jewish General Hospital, where they would be working under a female chief resident. And you know, that just has to have an impact. We couldn't get anybody to do the study, but our belief is that background. When you come into our culture or your culture as a resident from a foreign country, you must incorporate into the cultural values within the medical community, and that includes our interpretation of professionalism. But I can tell you that those Saudi residents had an impact on our faculty. The Saudis have got a good educational system, and they're just like our graduates. They got, some of them are good, and some of them are in the middle, and some of them are lousy. And I think we came to understand that. But the Saudis who went back had to go back different people, and it would be fascinating to see the impact. But we don't know the answer. We just think that it's there.
Yeah, we have Saudi residents, and they're really exceptional. They're chief residents who come over to do some of their residency, and then they'll go into fellowship.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're attired differently. They're all very, very intelligent. And I've always been fascinated because they love the behavioral health stuff that we're doing in the resident faculty clinic, because that component of healthcare they don't get in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So their ability to articulate what we do here that's absent from the doctoring role they'll do back home, and how they're enriched by those experiences, and they're so strong, the ones that come here, that I think our residents, you know, they can't help but admire them tremendously.
Yeah, look at the friendships and the bonds between the foreign residents and the domestic residents are really strong. They're mutually supportive.
Yep.
It's wonderful.
So I want to ask you, you've been honored with many, many awards, and I named some of them in your introductions. What is the most meaningful acknowledgement in your assessment of this body of work that you've been doing?
You know, that's hard to
You have different things that you really appreciate the most?
Well,
Is it
I have
mentoring?
to say that we're Canadians. I was born in Canada. Sylvia wasn't, but uh, we
are Canadian.
we are Canadians. There isn't anything this of equivalence in the United States to the Order of Canada,
Yep.
but it is the highest civilian honor that Canada has to give. It is almost completely apolitical, unlike some honor systems in the world. And in Canada, it's a big deal. And we were both made members of the Order of Canada for our contributions to medical education. So,
Wow.
I think that's the most meaningful.
and by the way, part of the reason is that it was a recognition that medical education was important too. So
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So look at the Flexner Award is
Yeah.
wonderful. But when you compare it to the Order of Canada, it doesn't quite touch the same part of our souls, I guess.
And that's really special for us to know how distinguished that award really is. And
Yeah.
for you to hold it so dear to your own hearts.
Yes. Well, and again, very meaningful that we both were awarded that.
So I'm going to close with one of my burning questions. Many of us in the US are in the middle of public protests for Black Lives Matter. And we're also hearing, whether it's at my undergraduate level, my medical school level, on the listserv for the diversity inclusion community within the AAMC, we're hearing massive calls for restructuring for medical education. Do you think the leadership of medical education is actually going to be responsive to the calls for major structural reform and curriculum transformation again? And how might we use professionalism as a way to drive that transformation even further?
Boy,
Wow.
I think we have to, it isn't that we have to be positive. The pressure for change in society is so enormous that I just don't see how any educational institution can avoid it. Now, whether it will be done well or badly, willingly or not, I mean, your personal experience, as we heard, would indicate that there's certainly going to be some pushback, because while there's huge pressure, neither your society nor our society is totally unanimous in deciding the directions it wants to go in. I'd like to, at the risk of playing around in more sociology, I have trouble reading Pierre Bourdieu, but I can use the things that I can understand. And one of the things that he's pointed out in quite eloquent terms is that any social structure is essentially self-perpetuating.
Yeah.
And that in doing, and that it's fairly resistant to change. And the sociologists have pointed out that the professions become more rigid the longer they have been active, and their internal bureaucracies are threatened by change. But Bourdieu said that inherent in any social structure as it reproduces itself is that it reproduces all of the good and the bad things within it. So power relationships, hierarchies, inequities are going to be, you have to consciously work to prevent that happening. But I think that the medical education community, not necessarily the entire medical community, but the medical education community has understood for the last 20 or 25 years that fact. So there were 12 female medical students in Columbia in 1951. There were 12 the year before, there were 12 the year after. Yeah, I mean, that lasted forever. It didn't matter if you were bright or dumb. They took 12 women.
Right.
That got fixed. And it got fixed because we understood it was wrong and so forth. And if you look at the makeup of every single medical class in North America and compare the pictures of the class with the picture of the class 50 years ago, they are totally different. And they are totally different because we have been working to make them different. So we're reasonably confident that the more we understand the issues, the more our actions are going to actually be addressed and try and solve them. And I think we can look back and see that we have made some progress.
Yeah, when I was president of the House Staff Council at Hopkins, we actually implemented for the first time maternity and paternity leave for residents. So for the first time, a female resident didn't get fired when she got pregnant.
Yeah.
You know, and that's in my lifetime. You know, we doubled the number of women in the residency program because we lobbied to be able to wear our own clothes rather than white zoot suits all the time.
Yeah.
But this feels, the structural racism, the calls for change feel so much more comprehensive and also so much more imperative. You know, the last keynote speaker talking about COVID and pediatric population. I mean, if we don't figure this out, it's just going to be tragic. So I'm just hoping that in fact, we can use this professionalism movement as a way to continue to drive even bigger and bigger structural changes.
And you know, in fact, the professionalism movement can do that, but the concept of the social contract with reciprocal both rights and obligations, and it stresses the importance of meeting reasonable societal expectations, which we don't always do.
So focusing on the social contract is really the key avenue to looking at restructuring health professions training and delivery.
That's correct.
That is correct.
And by the way, that's the paper we had the most difficulty getting accepted.
But it's the one I like the most, and I'm glad you got it accepted. It's also, I think, one of your longest ones.
Yes.
So Tom has one question, and this is a tough one. He would love to know your thoughts on honoring conscious objections of physicians whose personal values clash with professional expectations.
Well, you know, we go through that in Canada. It's a little bit different where you have a national health service. There is now jurisprudence in Canada indicating that abortions, for example, must be made available. The legislation does not state that every physician must be willing to do abortions, but in each region, the service has to be available, even in areas where there is only a Catholic hospital. And I think that's where we are. That you mustn't force physicians to do things that cross their own personal moral boundaries. Matter of fact, you can't. But you certainly must ensure that those services are available. I mean, it's not a very hard question for a Canadian. It's a much harder question, like a lot of questions within the healthcare system for Americans.
Yeah. So I'm done with my questions. I'm going to open it back to you and have you share if there's any remaining thoughts you want us to know from your lifetime of wisdom and masterful learning.
Well, I think we sort of didn't get to the fact that we evolved in stepwise fashion to the belief that professional identity formation must be a foundational element of medical education, which is what the Carnegie Report stated, by the way. They used the word foundational. So I think our closing remarks are that, you know, we look upon the most valuable part of our written legacy as the last, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 papers that had to do with identity formation and communities of practice. That's I think what we sort of, and by the way,
Where we've ended up.
and by the way, that, boy, have we ever been lucky.
Well, I would say you were lucky to find each other and to fall in love in your first year of medical school. I think that was a partnership made in heaven and made in medical education. I think, Barbara, are we at time?
Yeah, just about.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? I see Tom's question in the chat box. I don't know if anyone else. Lots of people want to say hello, which is wonderful. And
Well, we wish we were all in the same room.
yeah, we wish we were all in the same room too. Well, we really wish we were around a fire with some s'mores and hot chocolate and some other stuff.
Maybe even a hot buttered rum.
It's been a great day. It's been wonderful to share this time with you. And I have to say that I think one of your gifts is really your commitment to mentor. You have people at McGill who are coming up. You have worked closely with Yvonne Steinert. She has mentored you. You have mentored her. And think of all the people that you included in your books as chapter authors and how you've created this community of scholars and how you've mentored them and how they have contributed to your own professional growth.
Well, they have been a great pleasure to us, all of them, and have contributed greatly to our thinking. And we're very lucky to have had that.
Yeah, you were sharing with me that Yvonne was doing this magnificent program on faculty development, and you just happened to insert your stuff on professionalism into something that was ongoing. And gee, you had 100% attendance. You know, so
we had over 200 faculty members spent either a half day or a full day learning to teach or assess professionalism. And of course, what that did was give us a cadre of small group leaders, which is absolutely essential for this kind of stuff. But that was all. That was Yvonne.
But Dick, as Dean of McGill and Sylvia as Vice President of the Royal Victoria Hospital, do you see McGill now as a different culture, as a different place because of all this work that you've done around professionalism?
Oh no. Well,
No,
that's the wrong question.
I think.
All right.
Could we have done what we did without McGill?
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. We were able to do what we did
Because
of McGill.
and because of the influence of Osler and you know.
So you built on the culture that was already there
That's correct.
to make it stronger and richer and more exemplary.
We helped the culture evolve.
That's a nice way of putting it. And I think that your comment on the Order of Canada as an acknowledgement from people outside of medical education, recognizing the value of that kind of a work is testimony to your real accomplishments. Anything else? I think this is done. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Dr. Cruess. What a wonderful, enlightening session.